Welcome back, my friends, to the D-Rate the Hate podcast. I am your host, Wilk of WilksWorld.com, and I am so incredibly grateful that you are taking the time to join me for another powerful DTH episode. Friends, at the D-Rate the Hate podcast, it's all about bettering the world one attitude at a time. See, we did not create the hate, but with your help, we can derate the hate. That all starts with gratitude and personal accountability. We cannot control everything that happens to us in life, but we can control how we react to it. How we act, how we react, no matter what happens to us, how we react to it makes the difference. Friends, there is only one good thing about a bad attitude, and that is that we have the ability as individuals to change it. Here on the DTH podcast, we strive to bring you great guests and provide tools to do just that. Please be sure to share it with your friends. Subscribe if you haven't done so. Ratings and feedback are always greatly appreciated. And with that, let's get to this week's episode. Friends, I am hoping you had an incredible Independence Day holiday. Here it is, July 5th, and this episode's coming out the week after we have had some very turbulent times within our, I wouldn't call them turbulent times, but there's been some turbulent fallout as the result of some recent Supreme Court decisions. So I've asked my good friend Christian Watson, who you might remember from episode 100. I had Christian on the podcast for the first time back on episode 100. We were talking about the organization Color Us United. Christian is one of the great deep thinkers that I know of, and I know that he's been putting out some incredible content on these latest Supreme Court decisions. So I asked Christian to join me again this week to talk about those monumental decisions that are drawing such ire, making people go apoplectic on social media and mainstream media alike. There were three incredible, just very significant Supreme Court decisions this week. One on free speech, one on student loan forgiveness, and then, of course, the other one on affirmative action when it comes to college admissions. So again, my friend Christian Watson, one of the deepest thinkers I know when it comes to politics and philosophy. Such a great conversation, so much beautiful insight. Quite honestly, no matter where you sit on these topics, this is a conversation you're going to want to listen to. It will give you a lot to think about. So with that, Christian Watson, here we go. Christian Watson, thank you for joining me on the D-Rate the Hate podcast. Man, it's good to have you back. I know it's been a while, but it's very good to see you, my friend.
Thank you for having me back. I appreciate it.
Yeah, this week has been pretty wild in the news with regard to, three significant, I think there's probably more, but three very significant Supreme Court rulings this week. Christian, I know you've put some content out about those, and I know you're a deep thinker. I love the kind of content that you put out, so I really wanted to have you back on the show here to talk about these SCOTUS rulings. So first off, First off, for people who don't or aren't familiar with you, Christian, I know you were on episode 100 of the D-Rate the Hate podcast, but just give the DTH listeners a quick rundown of who you are, Christian, and what it is that you've got going on lately.
Well, I'm Christian Watson. I'm trying to cause revolution of the mind in our political thinking. I'm doing my best to bring back rigorous thought to American politics and discourse in the West. I host a YouTube channel called Christian Watson. I'm on Twitter at official C Watson, and I like to think of myself as someone who was the torchbearer for a impending movement that will help resurrect intellectualism in America. Of course, there are those who are more experienced than me, more knowledgeable than me, even who have been helping me get to that point. But I like to think of myself as the torchbearer, insofar as I believe that I have the grit and I have the determination to make things happen. So I appreciate you having me back on, and look forward to a conversation.
Yeah, grit and determination is certainly something that I see in you a lot, especially, with the content. And one of the things that I so greatly appreciate, Christian, about the way that you do your work is you're not diving in with the kind of toxicity that others do. I know we talked about this back in episode 100, but I believe you referred to that as a very bright flame that will burn out quickly, but you're playing the long game, and I really like that. You are coming at these conversations with a very thoughtful and very meaningful conversation. So Torchbearer is awesome. I love the fact that you're playing the long game. You're really bringing back that intellectualism that is needed in public discourse today. So thank you very much for that. So now let's talk about the Supreme Court rulings that have come down. There's three that I want to talk about specifically because the toxicity that's surrounding those and some of the things that people have said about these particular rulings this past week or in the past couple of weeks, it's been pretty intense. So let's start off with the freedom of speech case. The gal's name, Lori Smith, Colorado web designer, and she. And I've been getting some conflicting information. So I know you study these things more than I do, Christian. Start talking to me about that Lori Smith case.
This case in particular, I have not taken an immense amount of time to look at. I've looked more at the student loan case and the affirmative action case. This case, I've not taken an immense amount. So I have a very synopsis media overview. So I know about as much as you do on this issue.
Okay. Yeah. Well, then we'll just take your opinion on it.
From what I understand, and I'm going to be very measured here. From what I understand, a lot of folks are upset because the court affirmed website designers' right to do business with whom they please. Just simplifying it incredibly. That's what seems to be the case. Now, the Masterpiece Bake Shop case, where
Jack Smith,
where the Colorado baker was also affirming his right to do business with who he pleased. The court has actually a tradition of doing this recently. Although this court is very interesting because there was a ruling a few years ago where Neil Gorsuch wrote the majority opinion where he said that sexual orientation is actually a protected class from discrimination. So it's very interesting because this court is kind of schizophrenic on this particular issue. In one sense, you'll have Neil Gorsuch, who's supposed to be conservative, reading into the Civil Rights Act 1964, a class that didn't exist in the first place in there, by using a non sequitur to say that sex entails sexual orientation. Therefore, sexual orientation is protected, which doesn't make any logical sense. Sex and sexual orientation are two categorically different things. And then in one breath, they'll do this. So it's very interesting to me to see that dynamic play around. But my initial thought, seeing the reaction, was that the left doesn't really understand, and many folks really don't understand, free association. And even people on the right who are defending this ruling, I don't think will follow free association to its logical conclusion. If you believe in free association, which is the basic organizing principle of human behavior, if human beings cannot associate with whom they want, they cannot act in a way that fits their conscience. And if the conscience is not fulfilled in social life, then you can hardly have a guiding moral compass. Conscience is a crucial part of having a moral compass. It's not the only thing, of course, but it is a crucial part. I like to say that intuition is the starting point of moral understanding, not the starting point and the end point. Because conscience can be corrupted and it can itself not be a good safeguard. But generally, conscience is a requirement for moral understanding. But free association is the result of conscious decisions on who to associate with. And the moment that's taken away is the moment conscience, the basis of moral understanding, is threatened. So there's a very important point to be made there. So if you believe in free association, you must believe in free association for every single instance. You must believe that it's okay for a Black person not to sell or do business with white people. You must believe that it's okay for a white person not to do business with Black people or Asians or whoever else they don't want to. You must believe it's okay for a Jewish person not to do business with people who support the BDS movement, boycott, divestment, and sanctions. You must believe that it's okay for these things to happen. Most people would be okay with the religious examples. When it comes to the racial examples or even the religious examples, that's when they get very skeptical. And that's when they begin saying this is a little bit too extreme for me.
Yeah.
And we have to prime ourselves to be more comfortable with that. The radicalism of free will is that man knows what is best for himself, and even when he doesn't, he has the exclusive right to decide that for himself. And that will lead to a variety of different outcomes amongst people. Since every person is different and every person has different desires that guide their will go down different directions. And really, if we had a society that appreciated the dynamism of man, that appreciated how complex his motivations and desires is, I don't think that we would have a society that flinches when we say that anti-discrimination laws are a violation of conscience. They wouldn't flinch whatsoever. There's this old idea in philosophy that all human behavior can be reduced down to two principles: the pursuance of pleasure and the avoidance of pain.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
This idea is significantly flawed because human beings undertake actions that actually put us in the presence of pain and don't put us anywhere near pleasure, and vice versa. When you have a wartime hero going into a battlefield where he has a chance of stepping on a landmine and losing his limbs or his life, where he has a chance of seeing those he loves and he fights with dying on by his side, or he has a chance of not going back to his family, which is 3,000 miles across the shore in America. That's not the pursuance of pleasure. That is the pursuance of not just the possibility of pain, but almost the certainty of pain. You may say, some might say, well, he may get some enjoyment out of serving his country. Sure, he may, but how much of that is outweighed by all of the stuff he has to do with? The veterans are one of the most mistreated groups of people in America, especially by the VA and the government. And some of the most misunderstood. They fight for their country and they come home and they live in poverty. Many of them don't have the services they need. So many understand this, but it's the higher obligation to the country that motivates them,
Right.
even if pain. But that's not the avoidance of pain. And I can give you 10,000 other examples where human beings don't avoid pain and don't pursue pleasure, and vice versa. The truth is, human behavior is far more complex than reducing it to pleasure and pain. Human behavior has many other motivations to it. Heroism is a motivation, I believe. Heroism does not necessarily take into account pleasure or pain. It takes into account higher obligation. And so when you begin to understand that human behavior is so dynamic and it's necessarily so complex, you would begin to understand that association will necessarily be dynamic and complex. Then you'll understand that conscience can only be preserved by that means. So I say this. The Supreme Court was not ruling on a moral basis, although I wish they would, because the court has shown itself to be bound to stare decisis. It's shown itself to be bound to precedent and common law as opposed to bound to natural law. And there's this author called Haley Arks who wrote a great book called Mere Natural Law, in which he says that originalism, which is a philosophy that I myself have clung to in the past, is not enough. Originalism is only sufficient insofar as it may provide a hedge against extreme activism, but it doesn't actually satisfy the underlying principles of our nation, which all of our institutions, by their very existence, should be connected to. And so he argues for the court to rule on natural law as opposed to simply ruling on common law. And I think that's a very innovative argument. It's something that I think that I've been saying for a very, very long time, and that many other scholars of the natural law school have been saying for a very, very long time. And so this would be a no-brainer to a country that had a proper moral understanding, but this country does not. So the reaction to this case kind of shows that.
Right. Yeah, I think, and I guess I take a much more simplistic view of it than that. I mean, that's fantastic. That's awesome. And I think the reality for most people, and this is one, obviously this is one, Christian, that I think reasonable people can disagree on, right? I mean, this is one that I think as our society evolves, as more people become more and more in tune with, people of differing backgrounds than us, people who are maybe racialized as black, racialized as white, people who are gay, straight, homosexual, whatever. I mean, whatever you want to define yourself as, with it come, in terms of sexuality and everything else, more and more people are getting to a point in our society today where, they overlook things that people actually had as a defining characteristic in days past. My thing with this is, and And when it comes to freedom of association, and I think about the way that I think about freedom of association is, yeah, I'm pretty much an absolutist in that, you know, I think it's abhorrent for people to say, yeah, I'm not going to serve blacks, or I'm not going to serve homosexuals, or I'm not going to, whatever. I'm not going to associate. But I'm also a very free market kind of guy, right? And I'm also a person who, as society evolves, as it has in the United States, people don't look at those things now the way that they used to. And with free market principles, there are people or there are things that are going to happen that there's still some find abhorrent, right? But then others are going to say, well, it means nothing to me. I'm not going to do it. So if a cake baker in Colorado, or in this case, a web designer in Colorado, says, yeah, I'll serve anybody, I'll do business with anybody, as Jack Smith did in the cake case, or as Lori Smith did with this web designing case, I'll do business with them. I'm just not going to use my creative talents, mine, to try and convey a message of which I don't agree. And I think that's where it really makes a lot of sense, right? And because if somebody comes to me, let's say I make whatever wooden signs, for people's yards, and they come to me and they want me to make a wooden sign that I find to be, that just shocks my conscience, and I'm not going to do that. I don't care whether it has to do with homosexual marriage, or whether it has to do with, I don't know, anything, right? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what the topic is. If it's something that I'm not comfortable using my creative talents to do, I shouldn't have to do it, right? Whether it's with religious hesitations or standing or not, it's just something, my personal beliefs, and I think those need to be taken into account. So I think it's the right ruling, and again, I think it's something that will, as time goes on, the free market will ultimately determine whether it was the right choice or not, right? Because as society evolves and people see those things, if somebody refuses to do that for somebody on whatever grounds, and society as a whole does not like it, then that person just doesn't get to do business, because nobody's going to go to them. So that's my thought on it. Let's so I think we're on the same page. You just look a lot deeper into it than I do, man.
That's okay. That's okay. We all have different ways of expressing sometimes the same principle. That's all right.
Beautiful. No, that's absolutely right.
Everyone needs different approaches too. Everyone needs different approaches. I think that you are absolutely spot on in everything you said. Yeah,
no, that's awesome. So let's talk about the two cases, Christian, that you said you're much more in tune with. And let's start off with the student debt forgiveness, right? This has got people worked up a lot, because obviously it does affect a lot of people. You just being a recent college graduate, right? I don't know what you got for student loans. It's none of my business.
A lot.
But yeah, right. And me, as a guy that's more than twice your age, I had student loans at one time, right? I had student loans at one time. I paid them all back. And it's this weird dynamic, and I think, again, this is another one, Christian, where most reasonable people can disagree and have valid grounds for disagreement, and show empathy to those on the other side of the argument. But tell me where you stand on this case, Christian, because I know this is very much going to affect you personally. But again, you come to this with a very, very philosophical mindset, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
So when Biden first announced his student loan debt forgiveness plan back last year, I think it was either in July or August of last year, I made a video which went viral on Twitter and got about 1 million views or whatever. Got a lot of vitriol and hate, about 2,300 comments, mostly of hate from other Black Americans, attacking my physical appearance, attacking my voice, attacking everything except my arguments. And saying that I'm just a teetotaler for for the white man. I'm just I'm just some kind of advocate for my own demise as a black man, or something like that. And I also got called out by some pretty big people like Hassan Piker, the big leftist streamer, who didn't respond to my arguments, but just said, "Oh, this is what happens when you use philosophy. It ages you." So there were some very nasty things that I got called out. The only substantive critiques I got, and they were far and few between, was that the student loan system is exploitative. A lot of people were tricked into getting a deal they were not aware of initially when they signed that contract. And if you obey the law of contracts, that would mean that that deal was invalid because it was exploitative and deceptive. Now, what I think is true, I think is not true. It is evidently true that the student loan providers, emboldened by the government, have been exploiting the ignorance of both parents and students. That is evidently true. And the universities have been in on it. It's one of the reasons why universities raise costs every year. Universities with $1 billion endowments who can easily soak up the cost, raise it every year because the amount of loans they can get, the amount of money they can get with the federal government actually goes up. So that's one thing. So I absolutely 100% without a doubt in my mind believe the system is exploitative. Having said that, I also believe the fine print doesn't lie. Most people don't read the fine print when they enter in these kind of agreements. And when they end up getting burnt for not reading the fine print, they blame everyone else except themselves. We have a problem of moral obligation. This is the point I made in my video last year in America. And that problem of moral obligation says you are not obligated to pay back your debts. You're not obligated to fulfill your promises. And if we imagine a society where people don't fulfill their promises or pay back their debts, we don't have a society because society is fashioned on the forge of cooperation. And cooperation requires trust. Paying back your debts is one basic form of ensuring trust.
Absolutely.
The more forms of trust you get rid of in a society on a social level, like paying back your student debts, for example, the less cohesive that society will become if you normalize that across the board. Normalizing it in regards to student loan debt is already bad enough in a society where our economy is horrible and most people in my generation don't understand finances, financial literacy, don't know how to balance a checkbook, don't know how to anything about credit cards. In a society like that, it's already bad enough that you're encouraging people to be like very floating and irresponsible with their money. And so that is already bad enough. But if that mentality were to bleed into other areas, oh my God, what would happen? Who knows what would happen?
Right.
So that was my primary argument, was that moral obligation is essential to the functioning of society, and that we cannot get rid of that when it becomes convenient for us. Now, the Supreme Court ruled on a constitutional question, not a moral question. And this is my gripe with the Supreme Court. I really wish the Supreme Court would do what they did before this precedent came in, like in Marbury versus Madison, and actually rule on the basis of established and actual law and philosophical precedent. They won't do this because our system right now is far too comfortable with precedent and stare decisis. And unfortunately, there would be big arguments about what natural law is, who decides that, and I could say the same thing. What is stare decisis? Who decides how that is valid? That's only decided on the basis of if the justices in the court at that particular moment want to adhere to it. So the same argument against the natural law theory of jurisprudence is the same argument against originalism or textualism or any other doctrine that says we'll look at common law but not moral law. So, but anyway, they were ruling on a constitutional question. And the constitutional question was, does the president have the authority to forgive student debt in this way, in the way that he did? No, he doesn't. And Biden knew this. The education secretary knew this. Nancy Pelosi herself said this. He does not. He needs an act of Congress to do this. So they ruled on the constitutional question. And so people who are mad about the constitutional question being ruled upon are actually people who don't understand or appreciate the processes of our government.
Right.
Or appreciate the meaning of constitutionalism in general. Right. The problem is the Constitution becomes denigrated in the minds of Americans when the education behind its significance also becomes maligned and attacked. The Constitution has been attacked for years now by both the left and certain sectors of the right as being this document on the right, at least, of promoting a sort of liberal mentality towards society that disregards beauty and everything like that, and causes the degeneracy to sprout up. And on the left, for not acknowledging the horrors of systemic injustices and inequities. Constitution has many enemies. And unfortunately, a lot of young folks in our culture have been primed to believe the Constitution is just this oppressive metric, oppressive document, that it's not actually anything to like, it's not actually anything to admire, not actually anything to follow. So when you already have a culture of hatred on the Constitution, then you also have, as a result of that, people who refuse to understand the Constitution and therefore make legal and historical errors, like saying that this is a injustice against students. It's not an injustice. It's a matter of constitutional procedure.
Right.
So,
it's just a matter of the law and what the document says and what the document doesn't say.
right, exactly. So that's what the Supreme Court was ruling on. They don't make the law. They shouldn't make the law, at least. Again, and I'm sorry for mentioning this so much. I have a serious gripe with stare decisis. I really do that. That really gets on my nerves. Like this magical incantation that can justify the most absurd things, but that's a different topic, different day. But regardless of my gripe with how they do their jurisprudence, one thing is true. The Constitution says what it doesn't say. It says what it says and does not say what it does not say. And so Biden does not have the authority to do that such roving, arbitrary relief like that. No longer gives him that authority. And the entire thing was that during times of emergency, the president can suspend payment of debts. Well, the president also suspended the coronavirus pandemic warning that the government had out for a few years. So it's no longer a time of emergency. So Biden himself knew that this is going to be on thin ice the moment his government stopped calling coronavirus an emergency. So I think that it's unfortunate that we have such a deep lack of civic education in our nation. And I think that Vivek Ramaswamy, someone who has personal support for the president, has talked a lot about this particular issue, compellingly, if I might add. And he's given some very solid ways on how to rectify it. So I think that might be a future path that we should explore, to how to fix the cultural ignorance that so many Americans have of our nation.
Yeah, no, I've noticed, Christian, in the work that you've been doing, you do talk a lot about Vivek Ramaswamy. He's got some incredible content out there. He's one of those people who I think is an incredible, another deep thinker. He's got a lot of stuff out there that really should, or people should be paying attention to, and one of the things that I like about him, and in contrast to a lot of the other people that are out there, and for me, I don't agree with everything he says, but I'm not one of those people who thinks I have to agree with 100% of what a politician says, or walk lockstep with everything they say. I just want somebody who really is a thinker. They don't just say things for political expediency or whatever. They're really out there looking for results, and I see him in a way that I don't see a lot of other politicians, as a root cause problem solver. I think he's really one that wants to dive in and get at the root cause, as opposed to what a lot of politicians do, and a lot of these rulings and stuff like that. They're addressing symptoms of a bigger problem. And that kind of leads me into, this next Supreme Court ruling, right? Because affirmative action, in my opinion, you can tell me what your thoughts are, Christian, but affirmative action was never about looking at root cause problem solving at all. It was just addressing a symptom of a bigger problem. And the only way to ever get at that truly addressing root cause, whether it be no matter how you want to look at it from what angle, but affirmative action, in my opinion, the way that I've always looked at it is truly addressing a symptom. But if we want to address the actual root cause of it, we have to actually look at why there is a lack of diversity in the student body at most of these colleges, right? And then actually go for that, not just try to put a Band-Aid on it with something like affirmative action, which then has other adverse consequences of its own, right? It does other things, but I do think, and I know, well, I'm fairly certain that you will have good insight as to what might be able to be done, but this affirmative action thing and some of the hateful things that people have said about it, I'm not even going to go to the internet ecosystem that we've talked about before, Christian, or all the garbage that's been out there from a lot of these loudmouths. I'm going to go right to what the Supreme Court justices said with regards to this ruling, and the divisiveness that came out of our Supreme Court, which really bothers me. When Ketanji Brown Jackson said, with let them eat cake obliviousness, today the majority pulls the ripcord and announces color blindness for all by legal fiat. I think that's terrible. That somebody would say that again. So tell me what your thoughts are on this ruling, Christian, because I'm not a fan of affirmative action. I think it literally is one of those things that it was put in place at a time to try and address a symptom, but it's never really done anything to try and affect the root cause. Your thoughts?
So let me say before I begin the discourse on affirmative action, Ketanji Brown Jackson should have never been on the Supreme Court. She said during her confirmation rulings, she was asked multiple times. Once, I believe, by either Josh Hawley or Chuck Grassley. I know once by Chuck Grassley and the other by Ben Sass. That's right. She was asked, "What is your judicial philosophy?" And she responded both times, "My methodology is my philosophy." Now, she was either not being honest because she's ruling like a judicial activist, or she was being honest and she truly cannot distinguish what it means to actually have a philosophy. But any Supreme Court justice which does not set forth a group of guiding legal principles that will shape their jurisprudence is not anybody that I trust. It was very clear to me from how she talked, from how she acted, from how she avoided certain questions, like the famous one, "What is a woman?" that her worldview was not predicated upon any foundational first principles. It was predicated upon using the centralization of power and in viewing that power in the context of groups and clashes between those groups, and viewing humanity in this way as well. I knew it, the typical progressive mindset. I knew that's what she was all about. And this decision kind of confirms that, because she doesn't actually make any reference in that her little dissertation there. I read most of it, that is responsive to Clarence Thomas's brilliant dissent, which invokes the backdrop of history around the 14th Amendment and other issues in America about colorblindness. She simply says that in life, racism exists. Obviously true. But the Supreme Court is not the consortium of gods.
Right.
They cannot whisk away racism by the gavel. And by the way, even if they could do that, they don't have the power to do that. They don't have the authority to do that. The Supreme Court rules on constitutional matters. But it appears evident to me that Ketanji Brown Jackson, despite being someone who's supposed to understand the Constitution, does not actually truly care to understand the Constitution. So that's a little discourse on that. So this decision was quite interesting. It's affirmative action. You understand it for what it is. It is it was an attempt to impose values upon society from on high by means of coercion.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yes, it was an attempt to solve a symptom, but it was also an attempt to impose values from on high. And one of the arguments I've made is that philosophically, in any given society, values must emerge from the bottom up. Values must emerge from the people who actually inhabit the society. Otherwise, there is no accountability for those values, and there's no assurance that those values will actually be followed if they come from on high. In fact, there's actually a total assurance that those values will not be followed, because revolutions happen for a reason. Revolutions happen when governments impose order from on high to those below and try to enforce it through some kind of unjust mean, or means that infuriates the people of that country. So the only way to safeguard against the phenomenon of revolution is to indeed ensure that values come from below. And the only way to ensure that values are actually correct is to ensure there is a equal debate amongst the citizenry about the kind of values they want in their society. Well, the advocates of affirmative action completely skip that entire necessary process for human society, and instead LBJ decided to impose it from on high, and they created this apparatus within our nation for the past 50, 60 years, which has been setting unequal standards for some people and creating a culture of false achievement amongst some minorities and a culture of mediocrity amongst others. There have been instances where Asian students have been told by their counselors, by their students, by their peers, if they, despite having a near perfect SAT score, if they tried to apply for Harvard or Princeton or Yale, they would not be a shoo-in because of their race. That has been a culturally accepted thing to tell a lot of high-achieving students. Mm-hmm. So these values being imposed on high create this different kind of tyranny that I mentioned. And this different kind of tyranny has been what affirmative action is. But it's a tyranny that hides behind the cloak of benevolence. It's the tyranny that says, I'm nice, I'm great, I'm wonderful, because I help people. But it endorses in its subterranean composition a principle which actually goes against helping people. That's the principle of equity, which is the taking of resources from one group to give to another, the discriminatory appropriation of resources from one group to another, the theft of one resources to one group to another. And so on its basis, affirmative action is just an attempt to impose order from on high, and it's created a revolution of sorts in response to the conditions that it's resulted in. Legally, this case is very interesting. So so what the court did, they did not say that affirmative action is outlawed in every single university. What they did was they made the standard that would allow affirmative action policies to take place much higher. It's the standard of strict scrutiny. This is a standard that we've seen in the Gretter case that happened in 2003 in Minnesota, University of Minnesota. It's a standard that we've seen for a very, very long time. And the standard says that there has to be some kind of redeeming educational value to the advent of affirmative action and institutionally. So this was the language that Sandra Day O'Connor used in the Gretter case, writing the majority opinion. She said that there has to be some educational benefit to having affirmative action. So for years, affirmative action was actually okay if you could prove an educational benefit. Now, in this case, the petitioners, Harvard and UNC, tried to prove that there was actually a benefit in having affirmative action because it increases racial diversity. But Justice Thomas made a good question. He said, how in the world can you say that racial diversity increases educational benefit any more than diversity of eye color or diversity of religion? What makes racial diversity superior? The petitioners could not answer that question.
Right.
And Thomas noted that the top researchers at both Harvard and UNC, some of the top universities in the nation, could not produce a coherent answer as to how racial diversity meets the legal standard of strict scrutiny. And so that was the death knell of their little project. But if these people can find a way to fit strict scrutiny, they can still do affirmative action. It's just much harder now. It's not impossible. So the court didn't go far enough, in my opinion. The court should have gone much further than it actually did. But on the idea of strict scrutiny, again, this is another idea of the case following of the court following precedent, as opposed to following morality. Affirmative action is wrong in every case. It's unconstitutional in every case. It violates the 14th Amendment quite clearly, both the spirit, the letter, and the law of the 14th Amendment. Right. So from whatever legal perspective you want to look at it from, whether it be the activist one, the textualist one, or the originalist one, the 14th Amendment is violated by the affirmative action, the Equal Protection Clause. It's violated. So that does not say it's only violated in terms where it benefits education. That's called utilitarianism. And the court has been endorsing this idea of utilitarianism for so long. They endorsed it, for example, with they endorsed it with past rulings where they said that an educational benefit would actually permit affirmative action, the Grutter rule. They've embraced this idea that if you can produce the greatest good for the greatest number, or a good in a society through consequences, you can permit a certain action. But the 14th Amendment is violated by this particular policy. So no matter how good it is for some people, it is bad in principle. This is why we need to return to first principles in our nation, so that people can learn not to compromise when it benefits them, but to remain affixed to eternal truth. So in my opinion, this case should have annihilated strict scrutiny and said affirmative action is wrong in every case.
Yeah.
Which is why I think the right is a little bit prematurely celebrating this. We should celebrate, sure, absolutely, 100%. But we should not view this as a total victory over the forces of equity. We should view this as a Pyrrhic victory that hopefully will result in a total victory, but right now still enables the status quo to continue, albeit in a more constrained way.
Yeah, no, I think, well, yeah, you've made some incredible points. You've broken it down to an unbelievable level, to where, I wish more people, Christian, again, I'll go back to what I said in the beginning of our conversation. I wish more people would really think about things in such a thoughtful way, and not just let their emotions. I mean, some of the things that people have put out there in this toxic internet ecosystem over the past few days, based purely on emotions, the emotions of it. So many people out there just going apoplectic about these decisions, but I don't think they've really taken the time to think about, what is it really about these decisions that, you've got certain politicians out there that say that the Supreme Court is overstepping their bounds, and they're now legislating from the bench, and we've heard that plenty of times. You and me, come from more of a right leaning perspective, and we've heard people on our side talking about that when the court leaned more left, and then you've got other people out there right now screaming that Biden has to pack the court. We have to expand the court and then pack the court to make sure this doesn't happen, which you and I can both agree that philosophically that's an absolutely ridiculous idea, because then what happens when the right gets in power again? They don't think about these things from a logical and a philosophical stand, because as soon as you do that, what happens when the people you don't like get in power again? All of a sudden, it's illegitimate court, and now we got to put more people. And if you increase the size once, why can't you increase it again? I don't think. I think there is a lot of room to talk about these things, all the way from a very simplistic view, like I look at a lot of things, or a very philosophical view, like you look at things. But the big thing that I want people to understand, Christian, out of this conversation or any other conversation, is just look at this, try to look at it from all angles, not just those that go on an emotional tirade and talk about, destroying an institution to try and fix it, or talking about this being an illegitimate court because they don't agree with the president that put in these last 3 justices, or things like that. Just look at this, look at the topics for what they are. I really want people to listen to this and listen to it over and over again, because the insight that you brought, just talking about these things, I think it just gives a lot of people a lot to think about. And whether those people agree with you or me politically or not, it shouldn't be a political thing. It's a topic, and people need to realize that. Step back, step aside from your emotions once in a while. Look at this thing from the letter of the law, how the law works, what really makes sense. And then back to another thing that I've been talking a lot about lately, Christian, is root cause problem solving. A lot of these things get right down to root cause problem solving. We cannot impose moral authority on people through just on high. You said it a few minutes ago. You were talking about trying to rule these moral things from on high instead of coming from a grassroots, coming from the people up as opposed to the top down. We really have to try and keep our emotions in check, and people really need to understand it. Thank you, Christian. But before we wrap up, what is it that you've got going on, Christian? Where can people find you again? And let the DTH listeners know what you've got going on and what your visions are for the future.
Well, I think that this year is going to be the year that we grow. I'm very confident in that. I'm working a lot. I'm working very hard. Almost working like on top of my actual job. Also working like almost 6-7 days a week making videos. So feeling very inspired. I'm feeling very motivated, and I'm also feeling very captured by the moment that we're in right now. Because I think that what you mentioned, so there are a lot of people in this ecosystem who are simply doing this for either money or fame, or they're doing this to be a tribalist, and all of those motivations are terrible. They're absolutely horrible. I'm doing this because I love America. I love thinking. I love people. I want to see humanity reach the next level. But I also understand that there are certain ideologies that will not allow us to reach that next level, and that instead will actively inhibit and fight us. So I think this is a very exciting year. We got more content coming out on YouTube.com and other places as well. All my stuff can be found on Twitter /official C Watson. You can also find all my stuff on my website, christianjwatson.com. And of course, my YouTube, which will all be in those links as well. So thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. It's always nice to come back on here, and I'll happily come back anytime, of course.
Thank you very much, Christian. I do appreciate it. And all the ways to contact you will be in the show notes as always. Thank you very much, my friend. Looking forward to the next time.
All right. Thank you.
Friends, if there's anything in this episode that provided exceptional value to you, please make sure to hit that share button. Share it with your friends, share it far and wide. And of course, if you haven't done so already, be sure to subscribe right from our website so you can get the Derate the Hate podcast sent to your email inbox every week. So this is Wilk wrapping up for the week, saying get out there, be kind to one another, be grateful for everything that you've got, and remember, it's up to you to make each and every day the day that you want it to be. If there is something that you would like to share with me, you can catch me on most social media platforms, or you can email me directly, wilk@wilksworld.com. With that, my friends, I am going to back on out of here, and we will catch you next week. Take care.